neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitters are the acetylcholine, that's excitatory, GABA, inhibitory, serotonin, inhibitory, dopamine, catecholamines. Glutamate's not on here, but we've kind of been talking about that. It's also excitatory. So acetylcholine is like the main one that's associated with Alzheimer's and then also cognitive decline. And especially the part of the brain that's called the hippocampus. And we already talked about the hippocampus because in the hippocampus, the dentate gyrus, that is where we get that new neuroneogenesis, right? That's where new neurons can form. So if we have low acetylcholine, the symptoms that we're going to have are a poor memory, slow mentation, difficulty finding your way around, losing your keys, losing your phone, your car, your glasses, can't keep track of your stuff, need to use your GPS to get around, have to write down stuff, can't remember it, can't get to your appointments, and you'll get into a room and wonder why you're there. You know you went in there for something, but what was it? This is not good. These are things we accept as normal, and they're not normal. They're not good. It's brain degeneration. So acetylcholine is produced in the axon of the nerve. So it's produced right in here. And so what it is, see, this is a mitochondria again. Mitochondria is part of the Krebs cycle. And here's choline. Choline is part of the methylation cycle. So these two are going to hook up. Acetyl-CoA, acetyl group hooks up with choline to make acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter. That's how it happens. You get acetyl from sugar plus the choline, acetylcholine. Neuroexcitatory, and at the same time, anti-inflammatory, improves your memory. So the main place where we're interested in Alzheimer's, where you know this is the number one first place that is affected, is the basal forebrain, and this is what has the projections to the hippocampus for memory. So this is a really, really important area. So right here, see, it says hippocampus. That's where the hippocampus is. The hippocampus, like I said, in real life, looks like a seahorse. Doesn't really look like that here. But you can see, here's the amygdala, part of the limbic system. It's also part of the memory system, converting short-term memory to long-term memory. On the left side, it helps with vocabulary, finding the right words. The right side, it helps with spatial orientation. And so what's supposed to happen is that there's supposed to be like a turning off and turning on. In order to make new memories, we have to allow for old memories to become more flexible so that we're not stuck in the mud. And that's part of what the hippocampus does. That's what part of what acetylcholine does. This Papet circuit is what helps us with the emotional or limbic piece of the hippocampus and acetylcholine. And what's supposed to happen is that we're supposed to be able to organize our emotions instead of becoming overwhelmed by them. We're supposed to be able to take in new information and remember it and use it and then convert it to long-term memory. And so if we have a problem in the hippocampus, if we have shrinkage, if we don't have enough acetylcholine, all these things become difficult. So here's choline. So we were talking about that before. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter. That's, combination of choline with the acetyl group here, the Krebs cycle. Choline doesn't only go into being a neurotransmitter, it also goes into helping create the myelin sheath. It also goes into the methylation cycle, working with that short track of methylation, bringing homocysteine up into methionine, the shortcut. That's where choline works. Right, and so this is what we were talking about before. is that one of the jobs of acetylcholine is to suppress the old associations. So again, this is inhibition. Inhibition is very, very important for high function. So we have to inhibit in order to create something that's new, in order to take in new information and make meaning with it. Acetylcholine also works on the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system we talked about before with babies and how they go from being sympathetic to parasympathetic dominant as they grow up. And anyways, that's what's supposed to happen. So all of the preganglionic neurons are run by the acetylcholine, both sympathetic and parasympathetic. So those are the preganglionic parts of the autonomic nervous system are in the spinal cord, basically, brainstem. And then the post-ganglionic neurons, the acetylcholine's action is all along the parasympathetic side and also the sweat from the sympathetic. And so you can see here, ACH is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is very, very impactful for the parasympathetic nervous system, all these things. And along with the vagus nerve, so we have vagus nerve, we have acetylcholine that have bidirectional anti-inflammatory communication between the brain and the periphery. So the vagus nerve we saw before as being a major inhibitory factor for the sympathetics. And acetylcholine works primarily on the parasympathetics. And so these two things are very, very important for the anti-inflammatory path between the brain and the body. GABA. GABA is the next neurotransmitter. It's inhibitory in nature. So when there's not enough GABA, then a person's going to feel anxiety, panic, they can't turn off their brain, they're ruminating, they feel overwhelmed, and they're like, but I used to be able to manage this. Now it's like too much for me. I can't do it. And I can't really start anything because I see this needs to be done and that. And I don't know where to start. There's just too many things. So that's like a low GABA person. These are the people who, if there's something happens, they're going to startle. And they're also like very sensitive to light and sound when you're low GABA because it's inhibitory. You're all like way up into glutamate, the excitatory the excitatory neurotransmitter. So of course, GABA cannot cross the blood-brain barrier because the neurotransmitters are too big. They can't cross the blood-brain barrier. They're made inside the brain or outside of the brain. They can't cross it. And GABA, in order to be synthesized, it requires the B6. Well, this is where it goes. It goes everywhere in the brain, basically. But I want to show you right here. This is what I want to show you. So glutamate is the excitatory neurotransmitter that breaks down into GABA. But it can't do that without B6. It needs B6 in order to do that. And in order to have B6, we need to have proper methylation. This is a gene. A gene is an enzyme. This is glutamate decarboxylase, which is the GAD gene. The GAD gene. The most common GAD gene to have a genetic SNP in is the GAD65. And that one is related to the generalized anxiety disorder. So this, when you can't break down glutamate into GABA, you get anxiety. And what you need is B6. What else do you need? What else works on here is gluten. Gluten will block this enzyme, so you can't break down glutamate into GABA, and you'll end up with excessive glutamate. So that's one of the reasons that people have low GABA, is because they're not actually converting glutamate into GABA. They're ending up anxious, overwhelmed.
So these are more genetic SNPs. So we talked about MTHFR 677 and how it affects how SNPs or mutations affect the methylation process. We also have a different form of MTHFR 1298 that can impact the biopterin pathway, which is the pathway that creates serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. And if you have a genetic SNP for this one, then you're going to have a problem creating those neurotransmitters, and you're also going to have a problem detoxing ammonia by the biopterin pathway, because the biopterin pathway is just going to be slowed down. Ammonia is neurotoxic. The brain cells die when exposed to ammonia. It's not good. So this is this from the folate pathway, right? And how that can impact the neurotransmitters, brain health in a variety of ways. COMT is another gene, which is an enzyme, which helps to break down dopamine, and it can either speed up the breakdown of dopamine or slow it down. Same with MAO. MAO-A is the one that's most significant. It's for serotonin and also dopamine, and it can either speed it up or slow it down. And so these are genetic SNPs that are impactful on the neurotransmitters. So again, here's the MTHFR. So we say the forward swing, the 677, impacts methylation and creates that high homocysteine. That creates brain atrophy and cardiac problems. The backward swing is what goes into the MTHFR. That's what goes into the biopterin pathway for serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. And that's the one, when you have a genetic SNP here with the backward swing, the 1298, then what you have is a slowdown of the biopterin pathway by and large, and a difficulty clearing out ammonia from the brain. And then that is neurotoxic. So this is the biopterin pathway right here. So you can see that this is, these are the precursors for dopamine and serotonin. So we need to have the amino acids, the iron, the Bs, and then when we make dopamine, it's not enough to just have dopamine. We should have it, and then it should get broken down. If things stay around too long, then it also is not good. It's not having proper function. So dopamine, if it's broken down properly by Compton, MAO, others too, but primarily, then if it's made properly, broken down properly, awesome. If it's not, then we can end up not only with high dopamine, we can end up with high norepinephrine and high epinephrine, which is adrenaline. That doesn't feel good. And then here's serotonin. Serotonin also requires the amino acids, iron, B, to be broken down into melatonin, and then its byproducts by MAO and others. So serotonin is produced in the brain and in the gut. If you have low serotonin, then you're like, why do I feel bad? I should feel better. I have a great life. Nothing's wrong with my life, but I just don't feel happy. That's serotonin. And it's the one that's associated with seasonal affective disorder, because that's the raphe in the is what kind of has receptors for light. And so when there's not enough light, then you're not able to make the serotonin in the brain. And so you get the seasonal affective disorder. And because it breaks down into melatonin is what comes up to make us sleepy and then comes down to make us wake up.
So if you're not getting enough serotonin, you're not getting enough melatonin, so you have disrupted sleep cycles. And so the body's like, let me help you out. Let me give you more carbohydrates so that you can try to produce more serotonin. And people just feel like, oh, I hate everything. I just want to be by myself. I don't feel like doing anything. So that's serotonin. Here it is. Here's a ribonuclease where serotonin is produced in the brain. Then it, of course, goes everywhere in the brain. But only 5% of the production of serotonin is in the brain. The rest of it's in the gut. 95% is in the gut. So what we know now, a lot of affective disorders, a lot of the signals, the signs that go along with cognitive decline are actually gut issues. And we've talked about autonomics, but also the neurotransmitters are related to that. And so serotonin is one of the primary regulators of the enteric nervous system in the belly. It's responsible for motility and propulsion. I mean, parasympathetics do that too, but they both play in the same way. It regulates the immune system. And then talk about leaky brain, leaky gut. Serotonin is what regulates the epithelial integrity of the gut. And so it's responsible in part, for keeping that sealed so you don't get the leaky gut. So we talked about serotonin production here in the biopterin pathway and how we need to have that good folate to feed into it, that good methylation to feed into it. Now, dopamine. When you have low dopamine, this is a person who's unmotivated. Very hard to start tasks because they just don't feel like it. Once they start it, that makes them feel better. So they can go for a little while because doing a task that you like it creates dopamine. But then usually they're going to peter out. They can't finish their task because they get distracted by something else that needs to be done. So they'll start and not finish. And there's like really so sad. They beat themselves up. And they rely on caffeine and sugar to be able to try to get a dopamine high, because those things do help to create dopamine. Alcohol, gambling, those things also help create dopamine. So these folks also are going to isolate, but then they fly off the handle. And that anger creates dopamine. And these are like, my teachers always said, the dopamine patient is the hardest patient to deal with because they have a real hard time doing anything. They don't have compliance. Maybe they're going to do their exercise once, but they take their pill here and there, but it's very hard to regulate for the dopamine, the person who's low in dopamine, and they're constipated. So now, Parkinson's is related to dopamine, low dopamine. So now the idea is that Parkinson's actually starts in the belly and that it works its way up. It crawls up the vagus nerve into the brain. And that the first symptom of Parkinson's is actually constipation, many decades before you see Parkinson's symptoms expressed. So here's the dopamine pathway created in substantia nigra, ventral tegmental area, and the hypothalamus. Again, none of these neurotransmitters cross the blood-brain barrier, all created in situ. Again, here's the dopamine pathway. We have to break it down. High dopamine is going to create anxiety, aggression. Catecholamine neurotransmitters. These are dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. So the breakdown products of dopamine and dopamine itself. When you have low catecholamines, you're going to have slow cognitive processing. Again, easy distractibility. Again, the reliance on caffeine. everything is slower. Use the caffeine to try to get that high. We see again the dopamine here breaking down into the norepinephrine. That creates alertness if you have adequate dopamine, then you're like, I want to do that task. That sounds great. Let's go do it. And then that'll break down into norepinephrine. And you're like, I want to keep doing that task. Let's finish it up. And then if you have, where's my pointer? If you have adequate breakdown here with PNMT, then you're going to get the epinephrine, which is the adrenaline, and you'll be like, I feel awesome. I did this great task. I started it, I did it, I finished it. Now we're done. Let's have a party. So that's the way things are supposed to work if there's no SNPs and if there's proper